Welcome to my first official Anna solo episode. As you might have heard if you've listened or watched on YouTube, the Natural Birth podcast for a while, you've heard me announce a few episodes back that I will be doing a solo episode once a month. And I put it out to all of you listeners on my Instagram, and of course on here to let me know what you would like me to talk about. And I got some great suggestions. And one theme that was suggested and that was asked for several times and voted on was to talk about the witch wound. And so that is where we're going to start today with this first solo episode. Now, I have done a few solo episodes before. Last year, I think in October 2023, I will be linking it down in the show notes if you'd like to go and have a listen to it. I do a solo episode called Midwife to Midwitch, which was me talking about my decision to deregister as a midwife and call myself a midwitch instead. In there, if you haven't listened to it, it actually could potentially be a great listen before listening to this episode, because I dive deeply into her story and the journey that women and midwifery has been on throughout the ages. How, we started out for most of humanity, and, women have been birthing with other women, specifically with midwives and wise women, and how that, went through the times of which I will speak of today, which is the 300 years of mass murder of women, which is where the witch wound stems from. And so if you want to have some of that background and also, my journey of working in women's sacred business, women's work, becoming a midwife, and eventually, also then stepping out of that title that has now been kind of, stolen by the powers to be, to mean a medical midwife and a registered medical midwife practicing under medical boards, essentially, being controlled, and, can be prosecuted and punished. Midwifery really is still very much a witch trial in disguise. So if you're curious about that, and it could be good to listen to that before this one, pop on over to Midwife to Midwitch Anna's story. Today I'm going to focus on the witch wound. And I believe that all of us women, more or less, have the witch wound very much within our being ourselves. And I'll explain why. There's a science called epigenetics today, which is well known. There's something called transgenerational trauma, also well known, that what our ancestors has experienced gets passed down like an imprint within our genes, within our cellular memory. Even though we have not experienced it, we are programmed from our lineages, from our ancestors, to potentially fear something or have a certain behavior or so on and so forth. I'll give you an example to make it really clear. For example, the Dutch famine. During the Dutch famine, the women who carried babies that survived that, in their wombs, there was a famine, the baby still survived and lived on. The genes of those babies were imprinted to believe that the world had less food, that there was then, quote unquote, a famine, I mean, they didn't know anything different, but they were imprinted in their mother's womb um, to come out, and these children and their children had a higher likelihood than the rest of the population before or after, or who didn't live through the Dutch famine or wasn't connected to that in that country. They had a higher likelihood for obesity and problems that can come from that, like diabetes and so on and so forth. That was imprinted. Now you might say, well, okay, well, these babies were in the womb during this time, but also they're babies. So it carried on to the next generation, right? And the same has been seen, for example, with Holocaust survivors and their descendants. And we can see this all over the world. So that is more than psychological, right? Um, with the trauma that their ancestors went through, that's passed down. And this has been studied, animal trials, for example. I think it was mice smelling cherry blossom as they got kind of electrocuted. Um, and they passed that down. So I don't know how many generations down they could notice that if a descendant of that mouse that got electrocuted, not to die, but just electrocuted, when smelling cherry blossom, when a descendant, maybe even 7 or 8 generations down the line, smell cherry blossom, they can measure the fear spike, the adrenaline spike, um, fear of pain in that mouse. So here's just some examples of transgenerational trauma passed down and, the epigenetics, how it works and programs us. Well, let's talk about the witch wound, because this makes sense now, right? So for about 300 years, somewhere, mid, 1400s to 1700s, women were prosecuted and murdered for being witches. 300 years. How many generations is that? I just really want to pause here for the gravity of this, because actually most people don't even know this. It's not something that we're kind of consciously aware of in our cultures, in society today, that this actually happened to women. Mass murder all over the globe of women. Women that had any sort of power, so midwives for sure, the leaders of the community, any woman that, could heal others, could help others, who had any sort of skill that, threatened, I guess, in this case, the church and men in power. And any woman who owned property, any woman who had any sort of power in any way, shape, or form. And then beyond that too, so the witch burnings, of course, continued for so many hundreds of years, right? It was also a ratting out your neighbor, which is why the sisterhood wound very much weaves together with the witch wound, because I truly believe that, if you look at the essence of the feminine thrives from community, life, connection, love, pleasure. Women that are most women primarily have a feminine essence, thrive from sharing deeply with sisters, of coming together in circle, of spending quality time with women and building deep, loving relationships with women. But we all know and all have experienced the sisterhood wound, right? A lot of women actually carry a very strong sisterhood wound of not trusting other women and feeling betrayed by other women. And let's face it, we have both played the part. I have been out of integrity, out of sisterhood. I have hurt other women, and I have been hurt by other women and girls as, a child, teenager, and so on and so forth. And I do not believe this is the feminine nature. I do not believe that this is the nature of woman to betray other women, to quote unquote, be catty or nasty to each other. I believe this is a transgenerational trauma passed down from the witches' trials and witch wound, because for 300 years and beyond that, I mean, like, let's face it, still around the world, it is not safe to be a woman, more or less in different countries. But I mean, just look at some of the Middle Eastern countries where women still are being stoned to death for all kinds of things, um, are not even allowed to sing or speak or have any expression in the world that is uniquely her. She, is fully covered from head to toe, and only can she take it off within the confines of her own home where she's dominated by a man. I mean, still this is happening around the world, right? Um, anyway, sidetrack there. The sisterhood wound. It hasn't been safe to be a woman. For 300 years, we were killed for it. And very much, maybe to save yourself, you had to turn in your neighbor's wife, because maybe for a month, a year, no one had been tried for a witch trial, and it was kind of brewing in the society, or it was being called for. So to protect yourself, maybe you had to turn in the sister of your friend. Like, this was a reality for hundreds of years for women. And so the sisterhood wound runs deep, and I really truly believe that it still affects us and how we relate to other women. And this affects us in birthing, because still it is primarily women who attend births as midwives, as nurses, also as obstetricians, even though it's kind of 50-50 there, depending on what country you're in, stuff. But most birth workers are women. This is why this is a big topic in my sacred birth worker mentorship for my birth workers, to look at their own sisterhood wound, what they're bringing into the birth space. So important. But for you, if you're a pregnant woman right now, I talk a lot about in this podcast about the importance of finding a team that you feel safe with, birthing in a place you feel safe. If we look at the sisterhood wound, you know, what are you carrying? Because even if you bring in a birth worker that maybe really is a beautiful, clear channel and has worked on her own sisterhood wound and has a beautiful, relationship to women and has healed some of that transgenerational trauma, maybe also from her own life of having been hurt by women and hurt other women. If you haven't, as a birthing woman, a pregnant woman right now, looked at that, then you might not actually fully allow her to support you the way that you need. Maybe you carry hyper independence within your pregnancy and your birth, and don't allow the wise woman or the beautiful sister support that you can receive because of fear of letting someone in truly, or really trusting in their presence or help. That's how the sisterhood wound can play out in the birth scene, both as a birth worker walking in and like being there for a woman, really truly serving her, loving her, putting her as the expert above you as a birth worker. This is really important, that there is a healed sisterhood wound, or at least an awareness of it, because that's where it starts. I mean, I think it's something that we continuously work on, all our kind of, imprints from our lineage and ancestry, and from this life here as well, how we're imprinted with things, you know, quote unquote. I don't believe, we ever get healed or whatever. It's a process, and it goes in cycles, and it's about awareness, being humble to that truth, right? That we're only human as well, and only woman. So um that's, how sisterhood really affects the birthing woman. She needs to feel fully safe, not just physically, whether that is hospital, birth center, or home, or under a tree, or in a lake, you know. It's also with the people that she, feels safe with, the people that are serving her, that are supporting her in that portal. And so it's so important to look at the sisterhood wound. So the witch trials, that also imprinted very strongly this witch wound in especially women. And I believe we really carry it still, until we become aware of it and work with it, which is my invitation to you with this podcast episode, is to become aware of your witch wound and see how that plays out in your life today. For example, our womanly intuition, like our superpower. Yes, it exists. If you doubt it, it does exist. You're born with it, a very strong inner knowing. And it's so amplified, it's so strong, it's so powerful because you have a womb. The custodian of the infinite mystery of the universe. She connects you to the collective consciousness of all. She makes you into this divine being that can bring life through you. You become the birth portal, life through you, like from spirit through you into the physical. Like you are a magical being, woman, for having a womb. And this gives you just this deep connection to all that has ever lived, all that will ever live. Claim that. Now, for most women, this is something that me saying this is like mind blowing. You've never heard this before. It's never even been a concept. Maybe you know that you know stuff sometimes, but you've been taught by the current society that's very dominated by man and man's philosophy and views, which is the rational mind and logic is above all else, the kind of, God of today, and that your intuition is, and like, the proverb, the saying that is in every language around the world, which is follow your heart, is something we say, and it's fluffy and it's nice, but when it comes down to it, you make rational decisions, you make a pros and con list, you follow the logic, you follow your head, not your heart. Wrong. Wrong. This is so important. That is wrong. Your mind should be the servant of your heart. Your mind should be a servant of your heart. Your heart lives in the quantum field, lives in that timelessness. There's no time and space. Your heart knows the future. So when your heart tells you 100% yes for something, which is why when women apply for my sacred birth worker mentorship, before they even go through the application to book in for a clarity call, I again say to them, like, do you have a full body, mind, and heart? Yes. Like, do you feel it? Do you feel this 100% yes in your being, your heart, your intuition, you know? If not, don't apply. Like there's a screening there, right? Again, like really checking in. I only want those who truly trust and follow their heart, because those are the people that need to be leading the new earth birth revolution, which I am very much, an advocate for, and why I do what I do in the world. Um, and those are the ones that should be attending women in birth, because she follows her intuition, her womanly wisdom, her heart consciousness. That is who should attend births. And also for you as a woman, you know, it's just when you become pregnant, as you go through the birth portal and the postpartum, you become a mother, you start to parent, your default setting should be to listen to yourself, to your inner wisdom, to your intuition. Claim yourself as the expert over you and your baby, and come from that really deeply embodied place within. where you listen to your gut feeling, your heart. This is where your wisdom lies, truly. And witch wound, how does this play in? Well, it plays in that you have probably been told your whole life that one, intuition doesn't exist. And if anyone ever kind of acknowledges it, it goes like, well, that's a nice fluffy thing that you can listen to, when it's not important decisions to be made. You have been taught to suppress that. You've probably been gaslit a lot as well, as things, and someone tells you, oh no, I'm not texting that person, or no, I didn't go to that thing, or no, I didn't say that about you, whatever. But you knew someone was talking about you behind your back, or you knew something happened. You couldn't explain it, but you know in your whole being that someone's lying to you. That is your intuition. That is your womanly wisdom. That is your heart consciousness. And you need to trust that. And the more you listen, this is how you cultivate your intuition. The more you listen to your intuition, to your heart, the stronger that voice becomes. So wherever you are right now, whether you're a birth worker or you're a pregnant mama, you might be a birth nerd listening to this, whoever you are, start cultivating this very important relationship to your intuition. So important. Thirdly, another thing that we all as women, I feel, really navigate in this lifetime is our throat chakra being blocked and suppressed from the witch wound again, the witch wound throat. Our throat is all about being our authentic self, speaking our truth, having a voice, having an expression in the world, daring to be seen. This is so scary. And, I mentioned this a few podcasts back when I was kind of announcing that I was going to do this solo episodes, that my witch wound really got activated when I began studying midwifery. It was like this light turned on and the the bells and whistles started ringing, that I needed to be hiding, because obviously I wasn't the toe the line obstetric nurse medical midwife. I was the rebellious, questioning everything, rebel home birthing midwife, right? And like pro natural birth and empowering women to have, sovereign say in their pregnancy, birth, and beyond, and just super woman centered and not institution centered, or like, listening to the people above me who are having, control over me, like bosses and registration boards and so on and so forth. So the bells and whistles went on and told me, hide, which most home birth midwives, independent midwives do, because the witch hunt on us is so prevalent and so great. And like I would say 99.9% of all independent midwives will be prosecuted, sometimes several times during their career. Not because women that they serve report them, but because other midwives, Sisterhood Wound, remember? Other midwives, nurses, obstetricians report them. Because how dare you? How dare you think for yourself? How dare you have a unique expression? Why aren't you towing the line and being like all of us, listening to the higher authorities telling us what we can and cannot do, and serving them, And so Sisterhood Wound lives so strongly within maternity. There's a saying that midwives and nurses eat their young, like the bullying culture and like pulling you into line to be the obstetric nurse, to be the obstetric nurse medical midwife is very strong, very strong. And so this definitely affects maternity when it comes to being a birth worker. But I also want to speak very much so to you who are pregnant and, are about to birth your baby. This very much affects you, your voice, like your relationship to authority, whether that is, you're free birthing and you have a um, birth worker there of some sort, like a doula or a birth keeper or whatever they want to call themselves, or even if it's like your sister next door who comes there, you know that still you might put her as an authority. It happens naturally as we employ someone, whoever that is, that we kind of is looking to them because of their expertise in that field for guidance, right? So this is really important to navigate as you invite people into your birth space, that you invite people that are very aware of their own positions of power. I'm very aware when I attend a birth that it doesn't matter how much I very much try my best to create a relationship, that we're so equal, and I'm only there to walk alongside her, and as she asks me I will give her information or guidance, but I will not put myself as the expert above. And I'm very aware as I step into the birth space not to interfere with her journey and her process. And especially if you walk into the hospital or birth centers, and I mean, many also home birth midwives and many doulas will have a very hard time sitting on their hands, very hard time not doing to women, being the good girl, like, being the expert, coming with all the advice, doing all the things. And so, as a birth worker, if you're listening to this, check yourself here. But if you're, the pregnant woman, also, like, who are you inviting to your space? So important. And how are you about speaking your needs, your boundaries? So important. This is also, now you're training to be the mother your child needs, to advocate for your child, be the lioness parent that you need to be for your child. That it's what you believe in your inner knowing and expertise that is number one, and then secondary, outside noise, outside experts, outside people, right? But you're the sovereign expert of you. Voice, again, also sounding in labor, so important. So many women hold back trying to be the good girl who's quiet birthing. Like, sound is so powerful, your voice is powerful, let it roar, dare to be heard. And if this, like, just even thinking this makes you cringe, that's your cue. Like, you need to look at your throat chakra, part of your witch wound, of like being seen and heard in the world, having a voice, of daring to say what you need, of having boundaries, of speaking your needs. All of this, it's so connected, right? Throat chakra. And for us women, this is a big deal. I mean, and this is also like, as in life, if we go beyond birthing, also, for me, if I talk about my witch wound, it got activated with midwifery, and I very much kept a low profile on social media, barely shared anything. And not until I decided to step out of the system did I truly dare to do so. Cause the witch wound is so strong and it's very alive in midwifery, as I said. And it's only been really the last year, if you've been following me for quite some time, you know that in the beginning, I only shared birth videos, birth photos, and quotes on my social media. You barely saw me. And I've been challenging my witch wound. I've been really working on my witch wound this year, and really showing up on social media, daring to show myself. And it's still really scary to me. You might not think so, but it's, I am first and foremost, I'm a Virgo. I am quite shy, introverted, and a perfectionist. I call myself a recovering perfectionist. So everything I put up, I never feel like it's good enough, of course, as a Virgo, because I'm such a perfectionist. And also, I am by nature quite introverted and shy. So that's a part of it too. I have to challenge myself to share with you myself on social media or and here too. I mean, I mentioned that my witch wound has kept me from doing these solo episodes and the sisterhood wound, like, thoughts of like being judged or, who am I to speak and will they like me? And all of this comes up for me for sure. Um, and so it's been a big challenge for me this year to continuously get out of my comfort zone, to post things that are not perfect, to, dare to do these solo episodes. It's stretching myself, and I do it for the service of you. Like that is my why. And so I could never do this if this was for me. So I have to go back to my why. And my why is to serve women. My why is to be a part of the new earth birth rebellion. It is to lead the new. My why is my deep anger and fire and grief that the maternity system is looking the way it is today, and it's harming women and babies. It's harming midwives. It's harming birth workers. It's just harming women and everyone. And so that fire and anger and grief, which is my sacred rage and sacred grief, is fueling my passion for change. And the only way I can change, the only way I can do that is to challenge myself, face my witch wound, my sisterhood wound, my fear of prosecution, my fear of being judged, my fear of not being good enough, my fear of imposter syndrome, my fear of all of these things, and come to you, ask me, and um and serve, to serve. Because I believe being aware of the witch wound can really alter so much in your life, can change so much in your life, can for the better, for the better, for sure. As we become aware of things we are not aware of, we can change them. And it's not overnight, it's a process. As I've just spoken of, I'm still working on all these things myself. I think it's a forever thing. I don't believe we're ever healed of anything. I think everything goes in cycles. We can go deeper in things. And that's why, I mean, I absolutely love that I get to dive deeply with my mentorship cohort every time. For 2 months, we dive into all of these topics of the witch wound, of reclaiming our intuition, our voice, our relationship to authority. We dive into other things as well. Obviously, the sisterhood wound. I mean, the sisterhood wound we start this week, actually. I mean, this is the first week now of the third cohort of the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship, and we're in, diving into her story, diving into the witch wound here with the sisterhood wound and sacred space holding all intertwined. That's our first week, right? Then we dive on into epigenetics, transgenerational trauma. We dive on into our own birth imprint, our lineage, what is being passed down through the lineage, our red thread, our mother, our grandmother, and beyond, about birthing kind of imprints, right? We dive on into the rite of passages, which is our first bleed, birth, and menopause. We dive on into us being cyclic beings, one with nature, something that also very much got lost with the witch trials, like the natural mind, the feminine way of doing things in the world, all of that got very lost and suppressed in that time, right? It took 300 years to squash it, mind you. That's how powerful the feminine is. It was so, hard for them to do that because man, woman, everyone would still go to the midwife for healing and the wise woman of the village and would still look to women for guidance. And, we have been the oracles forever with our very powerful intuition, wisdom. And so it took a long time to kind of punish that and kill that truly out of the consciousness, which of course didn't work because, here we are, the descendants of the witches you couldn't burn, right? So, they couldn't squash it, but it took a long time for it to kind of reemerge. And now it is. Now it is, which is so exciting. Yeah, so we dive on into this in the mentorship, and of course also our relationship to our bodies, our vulva, our cervix, our sexuality. All of this so important as birth workers working with women, but also women who are pregnant. I work with women who are pregnant in all these topics as well. And I teach my mentees to do so as well, because it will affect how she goes through the birthing process. Now, I'm going to round this podcast episode up. I hope that this has served you. I really invite you now to sit down, maybe with a kappa in your journal, and meditate and tune into how this information landed in you. Did it resonate? Whatever resonated, take that on. Whatever didn't, let it go. And just sit with, how has the witch wound and how does the witch wound affect you? Because it does. More or less. All of these topics, your relationship to your intuition, your relationship to your voice, your expression in the world, how is that affecting you? On all levels, in your work, if you're self-employed, if you're a birth worker, if you're a mama, if you're a pregnant mama, you're about to birth, really sit with, how is this affecting how you show up in the world for yourself, for your babies? The world needs women that are fully embodied in being woman, in being cyclic, in being intuitive, in owning her power, in owning her voice. The world needs desperately people who are their authentic selves, who dare to show up as themselves. I am doing my absolute best right now to do that myself. It is scary, so scary, to show up on social media, to show up on here. But here's my commitment to you and to myself to continue to do so, to continue to dare to show up for my solo episodes. It would mean the world to me if you wanted to leave a comment on your favorite podcast app, on YouTube, on this video on YouTube, or, come on into my social media and share with me what this episode awoke in you, and also what you would like me to speak more of as we go forward with the months to come. It really means so much to me, and it also helps heal my sisterhood wound and my witch wound and my imposter syndrome and all of these things that I continuously work on, as you take the time to give me loving feedback and send me comments. Thank you to all of you who do that. I absolutely thrive on your communication with me. So thank you. Taking a moment to integrate all that has been shared. I know for some of you, this has been a really big episode. For some of you, this might have not been news, but just as I really see the benefit of revisiting this topic with each cohort I journey with, I know that whether you have heard this 100 times before, it still touches your feminine heart to listen and hear about the witch wound and her story that literally murdered millions of women during those 300 years. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.